everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of Clinically Correlate with Vedant and Azfar. We have our very good friend and co-resident, Kari Williams, here for our episode today, talking about the dual degree and non-traditional pathway to applying to radiology residency. In this episode, it was really awesome. We kind of walked through her experience of applying to medical school, getting her MBA between her third and fourth year, and then ultimately applying and then joining us as co-residents at Penn Radiology. And then finally, we kind of really do a deep dive about adult learning and the challenges we're facing as R1s studying a lot in radiology. All right, Kari, so we'll start off with the classic interview question. Tell me about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Kari Williams. I was born in Houston, Texas. Was raised in southern Texas in this metropolitan area city called McAllen. Was raised down there, went to college down there, University of Texas Pan American, where I majored in chemistry. So I decided to take a pre-med chemistry route instead of a, traditional or classic pre-med bio route. Just because I think that science came a bit easier to me than biology. And so I did that. I ended up walking on to the track team over there. So I did track, Division I track from first year to my fourth year. And then after I finished that, that's when I started studying for the MCAT. Kind of when I had finished college / graduated. That June is when I started studying. Took it a month and a half later, and then that's when the interviews started rolling in. So during that time, kind of was just working and helping out with the sciences with the athletes, and all that stuff, interviewing, and then I got my, I can't remember, it's called a pre-match, I think, right? Pre-match letter or invitation or acceptance from the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. So that's where I decided to go.
That's awesome. Yeah. It's very cool. You were able to walk on for track. That's something I don't think either Azfar and I were able to do.
Oh, no.
Nor I don't think we even tried.
Thanks, guys.
But so then, you ultimately started medical school. Did you always know you wanted to do radiology?
No, I didn't. Actually, I think I came into med school wanting to be some sort of orthopedic, cardiothoracic neurosurgeon times 2, I'm kidding. No, I think I came in wanting to be a surgeon, a pediatric surgeon. Gotcha. And then that's kind of who I started shadowing. That's what a lot of my early research was in. We're participating in papers involved in adolescent obesity, child abuse, and stuff like that. So after that, I think after step 1 is when I started thinking about other avenues other than surgery, because, I wasn't too familiar with the lifestyle other than what I've seen in shadowing. So then I really just opened broadened my horizons and said, okay, let's see what's really out there. But then it was actually this prelim medicine intern who matched into radiology, who got me thinking about radiology, and then he set me up with someone who got him interested. And then she actually ended up buying lunch for me, and then we just started talking about radiology. And then I was like, okay. And then she set me up with the program director at UTMB. Mm-hmm. And then he had me do this little activity with the radiology residents, in which we had to find an olive in a chicken breast with an ultrasound probe, and that kind of classic puncture with the needle, that thing that we did in simulation that one time, almost kind of when we were utilizing the probe, but this time it was just an olive in a chicken breast. So that training or that practice, I was like, this is what people are doing in residency. This sounds so much more fun than literally everything else I've done. Yeah. So then I decided to stack up my fourth year with radiology electives because I knew I wasn't interviewing since I was getting the MBA. So I had an opportunity to just kind of go every day, see what it's about. And I ended up taking, pediatric radiology, neuroradiology, IR, and then an acting internship in IR. And I think not missing anything. I hope I'm not missing anything. But yeah, those, and then I was just like, yeah, like I got my letters, and so, or asked my people like ahead of time, and like yeah, so I decided to apply radiology.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like you touched upon a key point of how important like mentorship is.
Yeah.
Right. Like sometimes it's like planned mentorship, but oftentimes it's kind of like happenstance of like you knew someone, you kind of met them randomly, and like their excitement in the field kind of inspired you to like think about it further. Especially like I think like fields like radiology where they're in the basement or like at least tucked away somewhere, right? Yeah. And like it's not as front facing as surgery and kind of like what you expect to when you're like starting medical school to ultimately be. And then like each person kind of like has their own path to get there.
Right, and I don't think it's overtly like offered to medical students as a pathway. It's kind of like tucked away, like pathology and PM&R. People don't really know about it unless they kind of search for it. Yeah. It's kind of just embedded into the training through our questionnaire or through our test questions and all that stuff, but no formal training in it. So those who are interested really have to like dig a little bit. But the radiologists, I felt like were always willing and able to help. Like they're really interested in recruiting and getting people interested.
Yeah, 100%. And like kind of like what you talked about in terms of your rotations in your fourth year, there's such a broad variety within radiology and like different kinds of lifestyle, whether or not you want a lot more clinical exposure or not. And like you said, like just the exposure for medical students and then ultimately being able to make that decision just isn't there as much as other fields.
Right.
I think it's interesting that most of us who are in residency in radiology, we sort of discover radiology later on in our careers. Most of us don't come into medical school thinking, oh man, I'm going to go into diagnostic radiology, unless you've had that exposure from the beginning through like your parent, relative, or like a very, very close friend per se. Sort of a similar discovery story for most of us. You can talk to anyone, they say, oh yeah, had this one thing in mind in medical school and then took my step one, and then throughout my clinical rotations, I sort of revolved into radiology because I think, number one, we see the usefulness of it and how they interact with literally every single patient in the hospital has some sort of a radiological study that they go through. And number two, and I think how pure radiology is in terms of its day-to-day work. Social work is not bogging you down per se. Like every day a study, we're looking at it, we're interpreting the findings, we're finding the pathologies, we're sending it away, and then we're moving on to the next study, finding the pathology again, and then moving on to the next study, right? We are truly the doctors of the doctors, right? And the pure medical and clinical aspect of it, I think it to some degree draws all of us to radiology, right? And like you did, I also in my fourth year did a ton of radiology, different radiology electives, because number one, they were chill.
Yeah.
They're all virtual when I was doing it. Like,
let's be honest. And number two, I think it's also important to see how much they differed, as Vedant was saying, in terms of lifestyle, clinical exposures, and the preconceived notion that a lot of people have is radiology is completely shut off from patients in the clinical world, which couldn't be further from the truth. It's really based on your comfort level per se, right? If you want to have almost 100% clinical job, you do breast imaging, you sort of do IR. But if you want to just slog away through studies, you can do any other radiology specialty, or you could just do teleradiology or a version of it, right? So the flexibility in the job is something that not a lot of us think about, but it's something that radiology has that certainly draws a certain proportion of people into the field as well. So it's kind of cool how you kind of touched upon all those sort of aspects of radiology that kind of drew me into the field as well, sort of the similarities there.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like our vision for having all our co-residents come on board is one, just to like learn their stories, and two, I think it is kind of useful for people who are thinking about radiology, may not be thinking about it, and then definitely in like the application cycle to kind of see like and listen to what those stories are. So I do want to circle back to kind of like the last point that you made, which is the title of this podcast, which was the dual degree and non-traditional pathway.
Okay.
And so you said you ended up taking and getting an MBA during your medical school years. Can you kind of say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so when I applied to medical school, I applied to all schools in Texas, and then some like outside of Texas, and then all of them or I paid special attention to programs that offered like a dual degree. I think at the time it was like Texas Tech, UT Houston, I think, and UTMB had just started it that year. I don't think any other schools. I think Baylor too, but I obviously didn't go there. So yeah, at UTMB it was their first year offering this MD MBA, and it was going to be a 5-year dual degree program. We had the option of like, I think it was like after our 3rd year, after we took step 2, which is what I did, or in between like your 2nd and 3rd year. But I was just like, no, like I didn't want that weird gap. So I was able to finish all of my like clinical stuff before COVID hit, which was, I guess, pretty cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, circling back, I applied into it. So once I was accepted to UTMB, I applied to that program like pretty much soon after. And then it was me and this one other guy, Carlos, my friend, and it was us 3 up until like the last year, and then it was just me, and then I just stuck with it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you kind of did it like, I guess you finished up the courses while you were interviewing. Is that kind of what the cycle was?
The MBA courses? Yeah.
Nice.
So I think everything was done like December 13th, which is pretty cool. On top of that, like everything was remote. So I was able to pretty much like schedule my interviews however I wanted to. As long as I got my work in on time, like everything was Gucci, you know?
Gotcha.
So I was able to like be really flexible with it, yeah.
Yeah, nice. And so can you kind of walk us through, what prompted you to even be interested in the MBA to begin with?
Yeah. So I would have these conversations about medicine, the future of medicine, and what it entails for future physicians, and kind of the landscape, culture, etc. With my dad, who's an anesthesiologist, and he actually recommended for me to get one. I was like, okay, I mean, sure, it's only an extra year. I could see the utility in the future for having one, especially like, I mean, sure, it's not really applicable right now as we're, learning radiology, but I do have, I guess, an entrepreneurial spirit that this MBA kind of is the foundation of. I at least have something to stand on. And so whenever I guess, pursue something in like now or the future, I plan on applying that knowledge, and it's not really directly related to the radiology training, but kind of around it. And I think I've talked to you guys about it in one way or another. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think our entire class, there's several of us with like an entrepreneurial kind of mindset.
Yeah.
We've had kind of informal discussions about that.
Right.
Even for me, I was a finance major in undergrad, so it was a similar kind of story. My dad's a nephrologist, and I think talking to senior attendings effectively, they've kind of also seen the progression of medicine from very much a physician owned and operated to now you have a lot more bigger businesses, insurance companies, hospitals, and then the business component and being able to speak that language and understand what's going on being a very important component, whether or not that's through administration or from an entrepreneurial aspect. And I think similar to you, I think having that early on definitely does help kind of shape your experiences, your kind of understanding of the different issues that you're seeing, whether as a medical student or a resident as well. Were there specific classes that you felt were very, very important? Or was there a focus on healthcare within the program?
There was a focus on healthcare. I cannot remember the specific names. I think it was intro to private practice management or something like that.
Oh wow!
Obviously, we had our accounting and our finance and all that stuff. Yeah, you had the option of doing healthcare and economics or ethics or something else, and so it was geared toward healthcare towards the end.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, I don't think. That would be a great class for anyone, even I think within our residency program.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You know what I'm saying? I know we have intro how to be awesome radiologist, HIPAR, but private practice longitudinal course would be great.
Oh yeah. So it was the prompts or the questions were interesting. It was all essay style, and so it'd be okay, you have to devise recruitment criteria to get 4 physicians in whatever specialty, and it's okay, what environment would you want to use? What's your pay? What hour? All of that stuff is what you had to kind of iron out and try to speak the physician's language before you even get there. So that was interesting.
Yeah, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
And so, how do you see kind of your MBA background now, kind of influencing your decisions within residency, or kind of after residency and as a radiology attending?
So I plan on. That's a tricky question because I don't know if I want to go private or say academic yet. And I think, or, little private-demics or whatever the people call it, right? I'm not too sure yet. And I feel like they have different uses in each. So I'm interested in seeing how this unfolds. But if it were to be private practice, I have a few things in mind that I'd want to get started or have an avenue to start or pursue. If I wanted to stay in private, in academics, I don't know. Gotcha. But I know, being here, you can't really go wrong. I don't think there's a wrong answer there.
Gotcha.
But yeah, right now it's all up in the air. I'm focused more on the radiology part, at least for now. Individual conversations we have is what I've been developing, or pursuing.
No, 100%. I feel like it's like a back pocket skill, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It comes up in different ways, and then especially right now in our training, ultimately we want to finish our training to be excellent clinical radiologists, right? And then after that, you kind of add on the different kind of roles and skill sets on top of that, and so kind of having these things kind of build longitudinally, I think is very useful.
And then I think the other silent point was I saw my dad get his MBA as a full-time attending anesthesiologist, and I was like, would you rather be doing that as a full-time student or a full-time physician? And I was just like, you know what, I'd rather not come home and have to do these freaking assignments and after a long day of work. So I was like, might as well.
Gotcha.
I think that's a critical point, though. I think but I think that's a question that is brought up a ton of times, and there's a ton of debate around it. As opposed, even folks who have this entrepreneurial spirit, right? Not just for MBA, but it's something like MPH, for example, right? When is the optimal time to get the degree? And one of the contentious points that is always brought up for both MBA and MPH is the connections you sort of build in business school. In your opinion, right, do you feel that if you were later on in your career, you'd have made sort of more connections that would be directly relevant to your practice, or do you feel like that's just not a trade-off that you have when you get your MBA as a student, per se?
I think it depends on, if you're kind of doing, an in-person versus online thing.
Yeah.
I guess attending physicians would be able to, go to a professor and be like, hey, I'm an attending physician, I want to do this, and what do you think about that? As opposed to someone who's in medical school who's just dipping their foot in it. So I see that, but I think the trade-off would be kind of having it in your back pocket to be able to build on top of it. And with that being said, even though I got it early, I'd want to emphasize hey, it's never too late to get one. Or if you think you need it, it's also not necessary to get one to get interested in the business of medicine. So don't I think more physicians should pursue it, either in training or outside of it. So yeah.
For sure. I feel like it's just the degree is so useful in so many different ways. I obviously don't have the degree, but I think as I progress further and further into training, I start recognizing the value of it. And again, it's just the basic terms, the basic business and finance terms that I'm not familiar with, but that will affect day-to-day practice, and that even affects our residency as well. When we think about how much call we have to take, what's the call coverage, how much what volume of studies we have to read, all these things obviously affect the attendings most, but then they sort of start seeping into the residents' lives as well, right? What sites we are covering, what sort of studies we are reading, right? And how much these attendings are crunched for time in terms of teaching, if they have to cover multiple sites and stuff. And all of this have to do with coverage, RVUs, what sort of stuff that the hospital and the university system is deciding upon. The morning lectures that we got on sort of the business of radiology, to me, it sort of seemed like academic radiology. It's just a more structured, at least for Penn, it feels like a more structured private practice, right? Because they're operating in the same sort of principles and metrics as a private practice would, right? They're trying to maximize their RVUs, they're trying to maximize the efficiency of all of the individual components, whether it's radiologists or technologists, right? And they're talking to us with the same metrics that a private practice would. For you, having that background early is just super crucial to kind of absorb the knowledge or absorb the information that we're getting as we're progressing through training, because some of those information may be going completely over my head because I don't have that language, whereas you guys will be able to sort of absorb and integrate the information as you progress through training. So I 100% agree with you that, having that knowledge background in itself is just super, super useful to us, and it becomes way more critical once we kind of get out into the radiology realm, whether it's academics or private practice, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
Beautifully
think
said.
very well said. I agree. I think like you said, the difference between academics and private practice has, I think, decreased, especially in the past 20 years. As reimbursements have changed, it's not just the clinical reimbursements, but it's also like NIH grants and like the amount of research funding, right? And so, I think the easiest model to think of is like they have full-time equivalents, right? And then you buy off your own time by having research grants. But then especially with like academic institutions needed to increase their like enterprise footprint in the area, have bigger clinical presence, that means they still need more people doing clinical work, right? So it is that like combination of ultimately it's like that clinical work that still provides a foundation to then be able to do all this high-level research we're doing.
All right, so I think we've sort of covered your college, we've sort of gone through your medical school, the very interesting MBA you got, and the usefulness that we see in us and the future residents. But now let's get into the residency process in and of itself,
Yeah, for sure.
Talk to us about your kind of application process, and more specifically, like, you're from Texas, chose to move to Philadelphia, right? How was that like? How did you choose your regions specifically, and what quality did you seek in programs when you were sort of applying?
That's a really good question. Thank you.
We're all about good questions.
Yeah, so because I got my MBA, I didn't apply with the class of 2020. I applied with the class of 2021, which meant like September or October 2020 was kind of when I was getting everything together. Like I told you guys before, I had gotten my letter writers early.
Yeah.
When I was a third year in 2019, after those radiology rotations, I had asked. And so then I was like, right, bet I at least have like a good 5 people who I can ask. And so I just like pop in like every now and then when I was on my MBA and just like, hey, like, you all still good on that letter? And then they'd be like, yeah, for sure. And then as we got closer to the deadline, I increased how often I'd ask. And I ended up getting like most of them like at least a month in advance, so I could just assign when it came to do that. So I think that was really helpful. I had the worst writer's block, I swear. It was ugly. I remember it was like, I was in the MBA classes, and it was crap because like I was in this corporate finance class, and I thought it was such a crap class. I thought it was so hard, especially because like we didn't have any lectures. It was just like responding to questions as homework and like reading the textbook, and it was just like dull and like, oh my god. And then I didn't do well on the midterm, so I definitely had to do well on the finals. Just like, this is like the worst. And then I at least got like a one like crap draft that was like 3 pages, like nonsense. Well, not nonsense. Like it was like my experience, but it was just like very rough, very like not polished at all. And then I just had these like flash moments of like inspiration from like June until like September, and even like or October, whatever it was. So whatever. Everything was said and done. I had like asked my family to edit it. Asked my significant other at the time. Like I asked everybody for like their opinion, and then I got to the point where I had this like final product. It didn't even sound like me anymore, and I was just like low key annoyed because I was just like, I should have listened to myself. And then I was like, you know what? It was like I remember it was like a Thursday night, and then I had a final on Friday or Saturday or something like that because the semester something or midterm or something was happening, like something was happening, and then like I decided to toss the draft. I think it was because my SO's like sister, who had like done all this writing stuff, she had recommended like, hey, just take the two strongest sentences from each paragraph and just like start around them. And I was like, I have like 5 days to do it, but whatever, like screw it, I'm gonna do it. And then it turned out to be like the best draft I had ever written. And I was like, you know what? Everyone who I gave it to is like, doesn't even need editing. So I was like, cleaned up the grammar. So I think the really strong personal statement helped me a lot too. Another thing, research. I didn't have like much radiology research because I had switched into it.
But like, so when you were applying, like, how did you pick your regions?
Okay, so the regions. Since I'm from Texas, I was comfortable with the South. I was comfortable with like the East and like Northeast, Southwest. Cali, I wasn't confident that I could break into it. I think I got like one Cali interview, and so but as I guess the trail progressed, I ended up cutting more regions. Like a lot of the Midwest, I was just like, okay, I'm good. And like a lot of the South, I was like, all right, I'm good. I think like Alabama and like Mississippi, I was like, all right, I'm good on you guys. I think like Virginia and like all these Northeast areas, like, okay, like I can like venture and try something new. I think coming here was a try something new thing. And then, Penn came knocking. So I was like, okay, you answer, at least, you at least see what they have to say.
Right.
Oh, and I will say, I am like a single person. I am not responsible for like a family of people moving.
So that kind of gave you a little bit of flexibility, right?
Yes,
so,
yes. That was the point.
Yeah. So you could say, oh, I wanted to be adventurous, so let me just apply.
Came out here, like, I'll try something new. Like, it's a new city for a few years. Like,
nice.
Why not?
That's right.
Yeah.
So like you have your regions, you have your programs picked out now. How did you prepare for your interviews? Is there anything special you did that you would recommend to the applicants?
Man, like, I don't think I really went on like, maybe like one or two like mock interviews, because I just had a feeling it wouldn't be like how it would be, Decided to like relax and just have like this confidence that you're not like lying, you're not doing anything, you're just presenting yourself as you are on paper, and like this is like the physical like version of that. So I'm like hell yeah, like I know what I put on paper, I know like how awesome it is, like I'm gonna show them like, hey, I'm even freaking cooler in person, and then like it really got through to a lot of people, and so I think like that's what we ended up talking about mostly during the interview.
Yeah, for sure. I think in radiology interviews, I think all of us kind of felt like they were more conversational. Yeah. Right. So as you said, kind of approaching it that way, you've done the work to earn yourself that interview spot. Now it's kind of time to show them that you're not just like this nerdy person who does well on research and academics, but you're actually a decent person who can sit down and record a podcast.
Yeah. Hey, let's go. And it's funny because during one of my interviews, I had my little spiel about who I was, like you freaking like practicing get down because whatever. But the interviewer was like, okay, we're not even going to talk about grades. I already saw that. Like, I know you're smart. We'll talk about other stuff. So we didn't talk about academics like at all. The entire interview. For most of them, actually, like, just like who I was as a person more so than the academics.
And that's just so important, right? As we're kind of seeing, like, I think especially for our class, we're all very different, but we are so cohesive in so many different ways. Definitely. We have many different interests, but at the end of the day, we can all kind of come together in the end of a block, go out, share stories, and just decompress. I think having that ability is just so much more important than what school you went to, what degree you have behind your name. Again, for applicants, I think at least people that I talk to, I always kind of tell them like, yes, it's important to be a good student, but everyone you're applying with are good students. Yeah. At the end of the day, you'll realize that the people who are by themselves outside of this interview, like just this, that's way more important than how good of a person you are, how much you can memorize books, and how much you know at the end of the day. Because at the end of the residency, we'll all sort of be at the same level, all be sort of confident radiologists. More or less in many different subspecialties, depending on what we choose to do for fellowships, right? But again, it's the people who we are underneath that will be way more important, especially now, right? We're not in high school or college anymore. We're all working professionals. We all have our own connections. We all have our own resources, right? At the end of the day, like having friends across the board is way more important than being like the best, most learned radiologist up there, right? And that's just super important to consider. So don't be an asshole. I don't know, don't be an asshole in interviews. So number one, don't that's just dumb. Don't do that. But don't be an asshole after interviews too.
Or
right?
before.
Like at all. We're laughing about it now, but when you hear these horror stories, it's like what is wrong with you? Like who were you raised in like a barn? Like who taught you all that stuff? And like
exactly, and I think, and even if you were like, people are different, right? But you get feedback from people, right? Change, it's never too late. Residency is definitely the time to do it because you'll be under so much stress in so many different ways. And if you have bad habits, it's really time to kind of work on them to try to get rid of them, right? And this cannot be said enough.
So I do have one final question, kind of like in your application. So, were there specific parameters you were looking at? And once you had all your interviews and you were kind of reflecting of your rank list, and what you were thinking was better or worse, and how you kind of evaluated programs.
Yeah, so I think location was a pretty big factor for me. I think that's one of the big reasons why I wasn't like too comfortable with the Midwest. Like I knew like the winters got pretty gnarly. So I mean, like I was okay with like a Philly winter, but I wasn't okay with like a Midwest winter. And then I guess it doesn't really make sense because I was okay with the Chicago winter too. But because I had gone to school in Galveston, I wanted to do residency in Houston for the most part, as opposed to like anywhere else, Texas, like San Antonio, Dallas, whatever. But Houston was like my place. I love Houston. I'll swear by it. It's such a great place to live and all that stuff. But when Penn came knocking, I was like, well, Philly would be such an adventure. And then I think my number 2 was Northwestern. And I was like, oh, Chicago would be so cool. But those were like the only 2 places who could have beaten Houston because that's how much I would have wanted to stay there.
Gotcha.
But after that, I mean, it was based kind of like on regions in Texas. Some out-of-state places did rank pretty high too. But I think when it came down to it, I was like, okay, Texas is at least familiar enough as opposed to like these random outside like other small towns or cities.
100%. I think like, what you're speaking of, there's a few things that I'm sure like when we interview like the rest of our co-residents, it's going to be, location ends up being number 1. 2, the people, right? Like we joke about it. It's like the most like cliche response during interviews, but it ultimately is that vibe that you get. And then like the final component is like, it's hard to differentiate like individual programs. It's easier to differentiate tiers of programs, right? And like Penn and Northwestern were like mine 1 and 2 in terms of just like pure rankings wise too. Because I mean, they kind of hit all the things across the board from like a professional capacity, what you would want in a training program, right? And like you said, there's that, and then there's middle of nowhere, like it is a program, and like you'll come out with like clinical training, but does it have the other components, whether professionally or personally, that like you would want them to offer? Maybe not. And so just like it's easier to separate those out and be like, definitely don't want to do this, or definitely do want to do something else.
Yeah. So, dude, you mentioned a Penn.
Yeah.
Super exciting day for all of us.
Yeah.
But now you sort of have this. You have to make this cross country move, right? So like, I guess, how did you find a place here? And number 2 is, how did you kind of make this move, and what are some of the challenges you faced?
So I found this place back in 2021. After we matched, like, what was it, May? In September, I was like, okay, well, shit, let me just, like, visit the city. Because I haven't been to Philly since, like, when I was a kid. Yeah, so I was like, all right, let me just see where I'm going to end up. Like, and it was me and my mom, and we were just driving around the city. And we stayed at that little Hilton on campus or whatever. University one. And then on the way to my uncle's, because I have an uncle out here in the suburbs, and there was just this complex that was being built. And I was like, oh, like I noticed that we had to like cross through all of Penn to get there. And I was like, oh, well, this is basically like right on campus. And I was like, oh, this is one of Penn's hospitals. Like, okay, so I'll just like see what this place offers. And then I followed up with it. I mean, I'm sure I'd look at other places, but like that place that was being built just obviously checked everything. Like I wanted to have like a garage like attached to the complex, because my parents' thing was like really big on safety. Philadelphia isn't like the safest city, X, Y, and Z. And like I'm gonna take my big forerunner from back home. So I just want to have like a spot, and they had that. And so, and then I followed up with it, and then I was like, I'll just do it. So I had at least the place squared away by like March of 2022.
Yeah.
No, 22, or at least signed for.
Yeah.
Signed for. So I was like, okay, so like the lease would start in June or whatever. I could just like move my stuff in as needed. And so, and luckily, like my commute to Hup is just like a walk. It's like a 20-minute walk. Less than, it's like 3/4 of a mile, but whatever. It's through campus and whatnot.
Nice. And so you showed like visiting the city and kind of looking around definitely helped.
Oh yeah.
Picking a place to live.
Definitely.
Right? For sure.
I recommend that.
So now you have to make this cross-country move, right? How did you do it? What are some of the challenges you faced?
Okay, so luckily with this cross-country move, the transitional year I was in my like home city where my parents lived. So it was like a 5-minute drive from my house. So I was able to live home the entire year. So I was able to save up and just like use most of my money just like on the move. So I think that really helped, and that's a luxury that I think most people won't have. But I guess just saving every month a little bit would help. I know I had my co-residents, they drove their own cars up there to Chicago and one to Houston, but I don't know if I would have been like willing to make the drive from where I was in Texas to like Philadelphia. I mean, if I had to, I guess I would have, but like it would have been rough. So I just I was able to live home and save all that money and then use that to help me move.
Got it. So you got a moving company, or?
Well, it was like it was a car transport company that
I see.
Transported the car.
Nice.
And I just packed like 2 suitcases full of like the stuff that like clothes. I was just like, so I compressed my entire wardrobe like to like 2 suitcases. That was a little hard. It was really hard, but and then I had my 2 suitcases, and then I had some stuff shipped to my uncle's before.
Nice.
So like I had my bed up there, I had my pots and pans, I had like utensils, plates, like trash stuff, and my TV. I had at least one TV from my place in Galveston, so like I took that up there too. But yeah, so my moving process was actually pretty smooth because of that stuff.
So nice. You kind of did it in bits and pieces, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Ship all the big stuff to your family in Philadelphia, and then ship your car through a company, and then when you're finally making a final move, 2 suitcases, and then you come to Philadelphia and kind of get everything back in your apartment.
Right.
Nice.
So I think, you've touched upon a little bit about like being an adult learner and the challenges about that. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the realization or like the understanding of what an adult learner means is that it came to me like when I realized like the things that I was doing at like 22 or 21 to study just seemed so much more difficult like now. Like back when I was like in college, I was running track, I was on all these extracurriculars, I could study. I guess like I could sit my butt down for like multiple hours a day and just like study. I'm just like doing that now as someone who we work full time, and to pop open the books and or the scans and just get back to it for at least 2 hours a day it's not as easy as I would have expected.
The full-time job component of it, right? It does tire you, right? Because we're officially getting there at 7:30. We leave at like 5:30. So it's still 10 hours.
Yeah.
And like we're using our minds the entire time.
Yeah.
Besides, the breaks that we're taking. But especially like at least I can say for our 1 year, like every scan you're like I'm like going through a new thing and like really challenging myself. And so when I come home, like I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's a component, and it's just like I think that's a shared experience of like trying to find different pockets of time to like be at the optimal level to actually study.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's radiology is different in that sense. Like you're always challenging your mind. Like it's not like I remember during intern year, like you'd have your quote unquote rocks. They're like, okay, they're gonna be here for a while. It's like a dispo thing. It's case management. Nothing really. They're fine. They're just gonna chill here. But no, any day like you're on service, you can get a scan. And it's gonna be like one of the have a lot of teaching points,
Right,
any
right.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the fact that, as you said, like being an intern year, none of us were engaged as much as people who are going into that
Yeah.
subspecialty, right?
Very true.
So it didn't feel as tiring because I knew that going back home, I don't have to learn all the different kinds of hypertension medication and their doses. I'll just pick it up as I learn. Whereas here in radiology residency, we have a purpose and sort of a motivation to kind of go a little bit above and beyond because this will be our trade in the future. And the fact that our minds are engaged the entire time we are in service and when we come back home, even if you try to put in those 2 hours, they're just not as effective as you'd expect it to be, right? I don't know about you guys, but for me, I felt more refreshed mentally in interventional radiology, even though I was putting in longer hours. And that's because my mind wasn't kind of as engaged in finding the minutia of all of the scan findings as I would in any other service. One of our chief residents actually says that R1 is the hardest year, even though you have a lot of weekends that are free, and even though we don't take any sort of real call, so to speak. And it's because of all of this sort of mental fatigue we get from trying to learn new stuff literally every single day on the service, right?
Yeah, and like and on top of learning new things, like there have been other avenues of studying and learning that have just like been opened up. Like, for example, like you don't you could just read your textbook, but you can also like go back and review the scans that you did and use that for your anatomy lesson, or go back and open anatomy, or hey, StatDX has like 10,000 articles for you to tackle. So like that on top of like life happening.
Yeah.
You're having a kid, Radiology don't care about that.
They don't. And then I think it's like, it's just all these other responsibilities built in, right? And some things even as simple as, I just got to clean my apartment today, right? That takes on a chunk of the day. I'm trying to do learning. That's taking on a chunk of the day, right? Yesterday, I spent all day kind of shopping for baby stuff, basically. I came back, I called you at 8 p.m. That's the time I came back home after I left in like early afternoon, dude. I was exhausted, right? And it's not like my responsibilities are going to decrease as I go. They're going to increase exponentially, right? Most of us are, as you said, the adult learner challenge, right? We just have so many responsibilities built on top of learning new stuff. Our minds are just exhausted, right? And all these other responsibilities aren't like, these are supposed to be relaxing.
Yeah.
No, they feel just as mentally taxing.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
Right. But I think you brought up a super important point, right? Because we have our learning when we are on service, right? But there's also this challenge we face in our first year of residency where we don't know the exact, what we like to call a sequence of knowledge, right? Because everything is brand new, right? We don't really have a sort of a pathway of like, this is what you should focus on first, then you should focus on this, then you should focus on that, right? So that's been a big challenge here, specifically in residency. Thinking back to medical school, right? Even if all your preclinical professors, even if they were not good at teaching, we still had first aid, we had pathoma, we had Boards and Beyond, we had Sketchy, but all of these outside resources that are available that sort of equalized the playing field for everyone, right? It didn't matter whether your professor was good or bad. It didn't matter the quality of your lectures, the quality of your PowerPoint slides, the quality of your exams. You had all these standardized resources, you had standardized practice tests to get you up to speed, to pass step one, get you into clinical year. Even if you're clinical year, we had UWorld, we had ANQ, we had, again, all standardization of resources that sort of equalized the playing field per se. Now, in residency, start your day on service, there's just no organization of knowledge. They try to attempt it in a way like saying, this is what you should focus on week 1, week 2, week 3. But I feel like they still sort of miss the mark in a lot of ways, right? Sometimes they think of in too high of a level for us to focus on stuff, right? I think that's been a problem for me I don't know about you guys, every single time I start a new rotation, right? Because we're opening up a study, it could be a complete train wreck, and I don't even know my anatomy, let alone what pathology I'm looking at. Like every single point there is a learning point for me, right? If I try to save that case and try to like learn from it later on, I'm just exhausted from that one study, trying to study.
Yeah, and like just for reference, guys, like I personally went from like straight chilling almost every day, going from like service and then coming home and like, just pretty much only studying for like Step 3 and articles here and there, to like, for a few days ago, one of our attendings, like at Morgan, he was like, okay, where's the inferior mesenteric vein on like on an axial scan, and all this stuff is just like little blips, and I'm just like, okay, so I don't know exactly where it is, but I was like, you gotta fake it till you make it. So I was like, I know it just drains the rectum, so I was like following the one thing I'm hoping would follow from the rectum to like wherever it would connect to. I feel like I even remember, I was like, is it that? I was like, you're right. And I was like, dang, dude, like this is really hard. It's really hard stuff. And it's like, you don't studying for like that stuff on top of like the pathology. Yeah. Like,
right.
It really is a shock to me. It really gets to me every day. Not like every day, but it's like, wow, like we have to know a lot.
Right.
And it's also new.
I mean, I think, we were having a conversation of exactly kind of like the framework of studying in radiology, right? And it's like, one thing is just the pathology to like be like, what is out there of things that I need to know, right? There's some things like, say, emphysema in a CT chest. Like you knew that before, you just like finally are seeing like the CT correlate, but there are now like specific CT diagnoses like that you had never heard of before that you're like, I need to know because like attendings will ask me about that. And then the second component is the actual anatomy, right? And it's like so tough to just learn anatomy in its own isolation without like in the context of what pathology, because like you can trace everything you could want for every scan, but like in a clinical service, you don't have the time for that, right? And like who knows if you're doing it correctly or not, right? Unless like you already have like the atlas almost of saying like you're doing the right thing. And the final component is just like the clinical relevance of any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Like, sure. I don't even think like most of us as R1s like touch upon that, right? And it's like we're just getting used to like I see a renal cyst, right? Like great, that's like a good like first day, but like then it's like, are you measuring it? What size is it changing? Is it just completely benign, or does it have like characteristics that are a little more suspicious or not? And then like there's so much more nuance to that, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately like. So, do you say recommend repeat CT? Is that biopsy worthy? Like, recommend urology consult? Like, there's all that stuff too that, like, not as R1s, I think we're, like, even trying to attempt to understand. But, like, eventually that's kind of, like, what we'll need to know to actually provide value to clinicians.
I agree. And, like, I think a crazy part of our training is that, like, and when we get to second year, it's only building on top of the stuff we get to first year. Like second year, we start tackling like MR, and that has its own method of diagnostics and all that stuff. So you're gonna have to apply whatever you learned in CT to whatever CTs you get to, and then learn, fill in the gaps there while also learning MR, which will be new to us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. 100%. It's like, I mean, I think like probably up until like our 3 years, only when you finally get to consolidate some of that stuff, right? And like you've seen every modality and every service that you would have seen, and now it's like, but now you got to study for your core exam, right? So like, there's always something new, always a new challenge coming up.
Like going back to are these thick textbooks?
1,000 pages, right? Like when was the last time you actually read one of those?
Like in the Fellows Lounge, there's a book on musculoskeletal ultrasound. A thick book
I
on
saw that.
musculoskeletal ultrasound.
I saw that. Yeah.
There's one for musculoskeletal MRI too. I was just like, these are thickums books, man. Like thick.
Yeah.
You get it through it in a month.
You just hope like, oh, they must be just putting every single slide, and each page is a slide. That's why they're thick.
Yeah.
Not just because there's just so much stuff to learn, and just gotta copy and paste in your brain by the time you finish residency.
And then so much stuff to learn to a point where like, after residency, you're not done learning.
Right.
I've heard from plenty of, I guess, attendings and fellows that are like, yeah, I mean, this stuff is still hard. I'm still learning it. They just pass their boards, and like, you're always going to be that kind of learner in this field.
Sounds good. Any last minute things you want to talk about?
Let's see. No, I mean,
We're good?
guys,
Yeah.
we talk.
We had a really
Great
good
talk, yeah.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for checking us out, guys. We'll see you in our next episode. Cheers.
Bye.
See ya.